So the coat copper and tin, and they coat aluminum and copper. Why is that? Now, we coat copper in tin to protect it from the elements. Copper itself is very resistant to corrosion and degradation from the environment. But under extreme circumstances, like in marine environments, inside sewage tanks, underneath vehicles where you have lots of salt and road grime, all those types of places where you're getting lots of dirt introduced and lots of really dirty water sprayed constantly on those connections, that tin to copper is going to resist having corrosion and degradation for a much longer time. Also, the tin to copper is much easier to solder to as well. So in marine applications and applications where you have dirty environments, tin copper is going to be your choice. And I think anything under the hood of a vehicle, tin copper is the best option. Something to consider whenever you're buying your next bag of connectors. On the other hand, copper-clad aluminum is a completely different ballgame. And the main thing is because of aluminum being less conductive than copper, whenever it's used in situations where a signal is being sent, like over RCA wires, speaker wires, things of that nature, coating or cladding that aluminum strand in copper allows for a better transmission of high frequencies. So if you're running pure aluminum wire, you would probably have a slight roll off your high frequencies because of the resistance of the aluminum wire. On the other hand, whenever you coat it with copper on the outside, the high frequencies of electricity tend to travel on the outside skin of a wire. So whenever you make that outside skin out of a more high conductive material like copper, you tend to lose those frequencies less, and it handles that better. So most of your car stereo RCAs, home stereo RCAs, speaker wire, all of that stuff is made with copper clad aluminum. And that's why. Understanding noble metals. Of the noble metals, the ones we're concerned with, be like gold, silver, stainless steel, and copper. All of those are fairly high on the noble metal scale. And noble metals tend to be more stable. They tend to continue existing the way they're made and not break down under different circumstances. So what does this all mean for us? Most of you guys, when we're talking about copper-clad aluminum, we're talking about power wire, ground wire, alt gauge, 8 gauge, 4 gauge, whatever. And for that application, the aluminum is clad in copper to protect the aluminum from the environment. It's kind of funny. Copper is clad in tin to protect it from the environment, and aluminum is clad in copper to protect it from the environment. That seems a bit weird, doesn't it? I mean, after all, the way you do electrolysis is by having two different types of metals exposed to electricity running through them with an electrolyte in the mix to transmit that current. It seems to me like having two different types of metals involved in the wire would set you up for failure. I don't know. And if you're wondering about electrolytes, you've heard this term before, I'm sure. Most of the time in reference to something like Gatorade or some sort of sports drink, replenishing your body's electrolytes. an electrolyte is basically a medium, for example, water, containing a mineral, for example, salt. In your body's case, salt water is essentially what they're putting back into you. So the Gatorades have a lot of salt. They're replenishing your salt. When you sweat, you lose salt because it comes out, with your sweat. That puts it back. It could also be acid. Like an acid or a base is also an electrolyte, which is how batteries work, essentially. I wonder if batteries could work off of salt water. Have to look into that. Let's stop for the comments. You guys think batteries could work off of salt water? What do you think? Honestly, I think the hardest thing to learn is that you don't know. Maybe it's just the hardest thing to admit. I don't know. But I do embrace the chance to learn. And I'm always seeking knowledge. And I'm always trying to improve the knowledge I have. So if you guys down in the comments watching this video have a better understanding of what I'm talking about, be sure and leave that information in the comments for myself and others to be able to enjoy. If you also feel that I have made a clerical error in my statement, any of them, let me know. But don't just throw that out there under the bus like, oh, you're stupid, blah, blah, blah. You can tell me I'm stupid. You can tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. But when you do that, be sure you give me your source. This is why you're incorrect. Now, the observant among you will notice that we didn't get into galvanic properties or anything like that, alkalines. That's because we're not here to learn all about science. We're here to learn what type of power wires we should run and what kind of connectors we should use to have the best results and the safest electrical systems and the long life of a system and not have to worry about it setting our vehicle on fire. Well, the thing is, most people in today's society are used to being able to just look for answers and find them without having to think about what it is they're trying to accomplish. Myself, my objective, my mission is to teach people to think critically and to give them enough information where they can make educated decisions on their own and not have to rely on someone trying to sell you something to make a decision on whether or not you should use that thing or something else. That's my objective. So if you want me to just tell you what to buy, it's not going to happen. I'll give you some options, explain why one is good, bad, why the other is good, bad, and let you decide on how much you want to invest and how much protection you're looking to have. That's the idea. It's not about telling you what you should go buy and letting you be a sheep. I'm going to teach you how to learn and read and understand what you're trying to accomplish and what thing will help you accomplish that specific goal. And think critically about it and decide how much you want to invest for what level of system or a goal you're trying to accomplish. That's the whole point. So to summarize everything, I'm not saying that aluminum wire is better than copper wire or vice versa, but you need to consider what you're going to use it for. The application is important. Both can be very successfully used in any application. If you want my opinion, I would say this. If you're going to mount something in an area where it's going to be getting a lot of water, road salt, things like that sprayed up on it, an area where you're going to have, especially just moisture, and that includes humidity, dew, all those things. If you're going to mount it outside of your vehicle, under the hood, you're probably going to want to use tinned copper lugs and tinned copper wire. That'd be my recommendation. It's also the most expensive recommendation, of course. If you're forced to use pure copper, just copper, like these guys, and copper wire, this, just copper, it's not tinned, you want to consider using heat shrink around your connections to keep them as sealed off from the weather as possible. Also, you might want to use dielectric grease on your actual connection. So when you connect this to this, you're making a connection underneath the terminal, underneath the lug, and you're also making a connection underneath the nut. So you need to pick the nut loose, check underneath the nut and underneath this lug, and make sure there's no corrosion happening in those areas. If you're running aluminum, say you're running CCA wire, future me interrupting past me's rant about CCA connections. If you do want to use that type of connection, use marine grade heat shrink, the heat shrink with the glue inside of it, because that's going to be as close as you can get to sealing off that connection from the weather. And that's important, because if you let that corrosion happen, which, well, just listen to the rest. And you're using most likely copper jacketed lugs, it's a recipe for disaster, because the connection where the aluminum goes into the copper is going to have a tendency to corrode. The aluminum itself is going to lose material to the copper, and that's going to break down into a green-white colored powdery stuff. And the problem is, even if you have it heat shrinked, or especially if you have it heat shrinked, heat shrink can protect it and keep it from getting wet, but it can also hide the problem. If you get water getting in behind that heat shrink, and the water is up inside this connection here and corroding away at the connection between your wire and your lug, and it's wrapped and you can't even see it, you could be failing and you wouldn't even know it. And what will happen is, over time, that wire will degrade to the point to where the conductivity degrades and degrades and degrades, and then it'll start getting hot because it's not being able to transmit as much power sufficiently. So it'll turn that energy into heat and heat all this up, melt it, possibly break it off there completely, and short the ground. And if you are team no fuse, you're now team no vehicle. Something to consider. So in my opinion, under the hood of a vehicle or somewhere where there's weather, the best connection is using tinned OFC copper wire along with tinned copper lugs to protect from all the bad things that are happening, as well as using good quality marine grade heat shrink. So in the marine grade heat shrink, you'll see, if I can make it focus, that on the inside it's really smooth and shiny. See that? See how shiny it is right there? That is marine grade. That's the glue on the inside. You reach your finger in there and you can feel it. The outside will have one texture. The inside will have a smooth, slick texture. That's marine grade heat shrink. Now your regular old generic heat shrink will work just fine for dressing up your wires on the inside of your vehicle where it stays pretty dry. But in the areas where you're going to be getting salty and wet and dirty and all those things, using marine grade heat shrink is a big deal. When you put it on and you heat it up with your heat gun, you're going to see glue kind of smooth out a lot of times around the edges. And that seals that heat shrink to that jacket of that wire, and it also seals it to that lug. That prevents moisture from getting inside there on that connection where you've got those two different types of metals, and prevents the problems in the future. Guys, if you found this helpful, informative, or at least interesting, be sure and hit the subscribe button down below. And like I said, comments are not only welcome, they're encouraged. So please comment, talk about the subject. We can learn from each other and move on in this crazy world of car audio. Peace, guys.